Hello and welcome to Off Label, the podcast where we talk about the power of marketing in the pharma industry and beyond. And today I'm delighted to be joined by James Mainwaring, who is the Chief Commercial and Operating Officer at Innovative Diagnostics. James, welcome.
Thank you very much, Ed. It's a real pleasure to be here and talk about marketing.
Great. So you have a very interesting mix in terms of your background. Science background, but you also have a real commercial lens. So you have a range of views across different fields, and you've seen marketing from different angles. So let's start with a really deep question. What is the value of marketing?
It's a very wide topic, and
Yeah.
I was sort of having a little think about this over the last sort of few days.
Yeah.
The value of marketing, I suppose, in the broadest context is, how do you create value? How do you sell, whatever service or product you have? Obviously, in the pharma or medical device world, which we operate in, that is normally selling a physical product, and you have metrics, and it's easy to see what you're doing works or not. I obviously come from life in a little bit more of a startup world in terms of the medical device, and I suppose marketing and value sometimes feel like they're very different sides of a chessboard. There is no kind of clear metric on what you're doing in terms of your kind of feedback. It's very hard to think about the future and see clear ways. But having said that, there are huge benefits to marketing. We've done a lot of I suppose conference kind of roadshows, either to pharmacists or to investors. The connections you can form, the partnerships you can create, the kind of intangible value you get as a smaller, more startup type company can be really, really big. But it's sometimes difficult to kind of sit there with a blank piece of paper and really think about whether that investment and value is going to be really created.
So are you saying that marketing is often an article of faith? Like you've just got to believe in it, and then when people, it's one of those things where you know it when you see it, but until you see it, you're kind of like, is that really going to work?
There's definitely an element of that. I think it depends, I suppose, probably an element of which audience you're talking to. One of the, I suppose, things I've learned over the last 4 years working in small cap companies is your audience is incredibly broad, and who you're targeting at any one particular time can change very, very significantly. And some are easier to see value or to kind of trust that it's going to work from day one, and some in that more sort of intangible, you're going to have to just sometimes take a bit of leap of faith to get there.
And in terms of those different audiences, and in terms of where they are on that adoption ladder or the journey, or however you want to describe it, is that something that you think in the startup small cap world people consciously think about, or is it a bit more gut feel and kind of like, well, that group over there, they know about a product, but this group over here, there are users? Like, is there that structure that exists, or is it more kind of shooting from the hip?
I would probably say shooting from the hip,
right.
If you don't have somebody who has sort of been there and done it before, or to
Right.
to guide you. I would like to think me and my senior team, when we've been spinning companies out and taking them on the journey, we have I suppose a clear view of what we're trying to sort of get across in our messaging. But we've obviously used a few consultants along the way to help us build up some messaging and to make the kind of brand feel real, which I'm sure we'll probably get onto later on. But it was sort of clear during that process that we hadn't really thought about it in a formal way, and there are definitely gaps in our I suppose thinking or understanding, or just other points when you really sit down and think about it, which you kind of tease out, which actually can become super important to break down and work out.
So you've learned by doing effectively. Do you think a lot of founders see marketing as a profession, and there's a whole science behind marketing, but do you think they see it as that, or is it like, oh, you're just the people who just do the nice ads? How do you think founders, particularly who wear loads of different hats, how do you think they view marketing?
That's a very good question, and it's obviously very easy to stereotype
Yeah.
people. But obviously, if you're working in pharma or medical devices or any sort of life science kind of arena, a lot of people are going to probably be from an academic background. They might be the people who've developed the technology. Sometimes you get somebody who's done a little bit of both, but I think we've found very much that it's more scientific. Um, and without being too generalized, I think there is an element of marketing seems a bit like a dark arts. It's not the fundamental basis of the company. Getting a good product to market and developed is the key source of the company. And obviously there is a lot of elements of you have to get a good product to market, but a good product on its own doesn't make a good company, doesn't mean it's going to be successful in the market. And I think people do undervalue marketing in general, especially from a founder point of view. I think there's probably another kind of stream of that where it's very difficult in the early stage. You're normally cash strapped, and if you're allocating money to marketing or to helping someone build a sort of website or brand for you, you're tending to allocate money away from the development or perhaps the hiring of a new person. And those decisions can seem quite, I suppose, daunting for people who, are just looking at the bank balance and thinking about how many months of runway they've got left.
So you were just saying something very interesting around the product comes first. When do you think teams or founders start to realize that, like, the product slash the science slash the technical benefits of whatever it is aren't going to be enough? Like, is it somebody like me who comes in and kind of goes, well, it's you got this lovely thing, but there's no market, or your customers don't understand it. When does that realization start to happen, do you think?
I suppose you can probably put one overarching phrase in front of that, which is going to be too late. It's probably going to be the kind of very much the standard view on that. You would hope they've talked to some sort of customers and key opinion leaders to, I suppose, make sure that they're developing the right product for the right market and there is an opportunity out there. We've in the companies we have worked in and worked for, we've taken some companies where we've joined later stage in the development of a product. And in those companies, I would say marketing has been very much on the back foot. And the problem is, which we're sort of trying to overcome at the moment, is you can sometimes get a product to market or, through regulatory clearance. And then you're either trying to commercialize yourself or you're trying to find a partner to, sort of commercialize for you. And actually the lead time of building up, good branding, all of, your kind of documentation, that whole story, and, going to customers and getting their feedback and understanding what they want, what they care about. They're going to care about a particular part of your story.
Yeah.
That work obviously takes time. And, once again, you've got a cash, ticking clock on one side where, even if you're not spending huge amounts of money on R&D anymore, you're still paying for staff and marketing. And people want to only invest in revenue at that point.
Yeah.
And so the longer you're just delaying your time to market, and that could allow competitors to catch up or the market dynamics to change, or you just, really struggle with cash. So I would normally say, too late. And that's something we've tried to instill in our earlier stage companies by trying to kind of invest, piecemeal, stage by stage, to make sure we're building towards a kind of clear model as we get towards market.
When you've got the product, unlike pharma, if you've got a device, you can change the product, I would argue, more easily than you can a pill or an injection or infusion or whatever. Does that really go on? I mean, how often do you sort of work on a medical device and then you get some KOL input and then you change it? Or does it get to the point where you're like, well, actually, we've already made the submission and we're just kind of done? Like, and there's always this temptation to continually tinker with the product? Because I think that idea of product marketing is something I don't think pharma really thinks about, the 4 Ps. We can't really change the product, but medical devices you can. So how does that work in terms of getting customer feedback and then changing it and then going through the whole process again?
I mean, it does happen a lot, and I suppose it depends what you're changing. I suppose I don't, there's probably every single medical device, company is always, tweaking their product.
Yeah.
You hope that you get the fundamental kind of performance and the key points in it, but there's normally always user improvements, UI kind of improvements you can make, along the way, where you don't need to kind of resubmit on a full submission to the FDA. You can normally do sort of note to files either in America or in Europe, UK. I think it's probably very hard if you don't quite get the right performance and your marketing messages are X. If it doesn't quite meet what customers want, it's very hard to go back in the future and say, well, we've improved it. There's obviously, I'm sure we'll probably get onto it more in a minute, but there's a whole element of trust in pharma and medical devices, and getting things right, at least 90% of the way, first time is really important. I think if you're tweaking user experience, then I think you're in a good place. But if you get the key fundamental marketing performance and then message wrong, it's it can be incredibly hard to come back from that.
You mentioned the idea that you're burning the cash all the time. Marketing often is done too late, and then founders and execs teams have got a million different things to think about. So what role does judgment / data / experience play in saying, well, how are we going to allocate budget between things like marketing to sales to R&D to whatever else, hiring people? Do teams tend to fly by the seat of their pants, or is there a bit more structure to it to say, well, actually now is the time we need to do marketing?
I think experience is incredibly
so
key.
It's the kind of the little feel,
it's the little feel, sort of intangible bits. It's it's very hard to I suppose have a kind of play by play textbook for kind of each company. There's always going to be differences and different kind of sort of periods where you'll need to invest. I think there's also difficulty around an element of luck. You sometimes depending what's going on your audience, but if you're looking earlier stage, you're probably reaching to kind of key opinion leaders or first adopter customers or investors, and it really depends who's in the room, who's listening to your presentation, who happens to stumble across your website on Google or an article. There are lots of things you can't control. There are a lot of elements which you can control and improve and build on. So judgment is key. How do you allocate budget? We try and create a business case for spending money in marketing, rather than just having you can spend this much money in a year, which can work for some teams. We very much try and say, well, if we go to this pharmacist conference, if it's one of our companies, or this nurse conference, these are the people we're going to try and meet. This is what we're going to try and do, and this is the value we can create. And we've had a lot of success that way. We've got a lot of data and sort of intangible benefits, which is before you go incredibly hard to measure. But
afterwards, aren't we glad we did it?
You can run surveys, you can run all sorts of things. The data quality we've got back, if you ask people the right questions, can be very, very invaluable.
So what role does brand building play in terms of a medical device? Does it drive that loyalty once you've got it to market, or is it more important about the actual the product that is brand, or is it more the company that is the brand? Like that I mean, I know it's an internal debate. Like, is it the product? Is it the company? But what's your view on that balance between the two, and how you build a brand around one or both of those?
Yes, it's really difficult, and maybe more so in medical devices than pharma, but certainly both. That trust becomes it is a huge part of healthcare. Trust in the product, trust in performance. Trust that you're going to have good outcomes. And the issue is, if you're a new company coming to market, you have zero trust in the market. You have no reference point. These 99% of customers you're going to be selling to will have never heard of you. And so, building a brand and trying to build your audience as you go along is, I would say, really crucial when you get to the end. And as we, mentioned previously, if you do it too late, as we're, sort of trying to kind of rectify one of the companies we joined at a much, sort of later stage, it becomes hard because you are starting from, point zero almost at the time when you need to be going into market. I would say building a brand around the product is probably more important for the market. Building a brand around the company is probably more important if you're looking for partnerships, or you're, if you're trying to form either a distribution partnership or trying to get your company acquired by a big player. They need to believe in the company and the rigor and what you've sort of built within the company. Obviously, the product is really the kind of interface your customer's gonna see. So obviously, you can try and do both at the same time, but it all comes back down to who your audience is and what you're trying to achieve.
If I take a step outside of healthcare for the moment, if you're trying to build like a challenger brand, say in razors or food or whatever, teams can invest a huge amount of money building up the brand, and then the bigger players just come in and just wipe them out. They change a production line, and then suddenly they're in the market selling whatever. Is that the same in medical devices? So if you're kind of this challenger brand, maybe is the wrong word, but innovative startup, and you're scrappy, and then Siemens or whoever look at you and go, yeah, we could probably do something like that, and then just cut you off at the knees. I mean, does that happen? And if that does happen, do they just rely on the company name of Siemens slapped on whatever it is to drive that growth and the uptake?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I suppose there are two ways they can do that. One is by a pure marketing kind of message front, where even if they don't have as good a product or anything, they obviously have much more marketing reach. They've got much more kind of brand and customer recognition. They can sort of out-market you. They can almost, take your claims for why your product might be better or cheaper or more efficient or whatever it may be, and sort of rubbish them. And so, you find adoption very, very difficult.
And is it kind of like, you shouldn't trust these guys, you should trust us because we're whoever, Siemens or whatever?
Yeah, exactly, and it comes down to trust, and they can talk about surety of supply. There are all sorts of ways they can do it. I mean, they could kind of rubbish your claims or just say that's not true. We've kind of reiterated our device to do X, Y, Z or whatever it may be. You've obviously got the worst case scenario where a competitor like your Razor example can come out with a very similar product. There are, I suppose, some simpler medical devices where that might be very easy. Obviously, in more complex spaces, you hope you've got patents, and can and you are protected by, I suppose, law. The issue with that is big companies have, once again, normally huge marketing sort of corporate budgets, and they can very easily take you to court even if you have a very valid kind of legal and sort of patent protection. And as a small company, you can just be kicked out of business just because you don't have enough money to fight them in the courts.
So it's like lawfare. They're like, well, it's nothing to us, but you guys go under because you just can't fight it.
I mean, that's the exact kind of issue and risk you have. You hope you find the sort of middle ground where these big companies quite often, find that it'll be cheaper and easier just to either bring your company in house in distribution or through an acquisition. And you hope that's the case. Obviously, if you're too hostile as a company, then that affects trust and brand recognition in wider markets. So, I think companies are normally fairly keen not to do that unless they've got, similar patents where they think it's kind of beneficial.
Yeah. So you've got a finance background. I want to dive into kind of the whole idea of what's the return of investment on marketing. How do you, when you're looking at kind of return and the kind of the hard numbers, do you even do that? If you do, how do you do it? Or is it more experience and gut feeling and think, well, yeah, we're sponsoring this conference is worth it, or building this brand and investing in the imagery and the wherewithal is worth it? Like, how do you marry the numbers?
For most of our companies, we're still in the case where we don't have any good metrics.
Right.
We're not quite at the point where we're selling. We're actually selling product, and if you're in the big consumer, type area, then if you invest in in sponsoring something like the Super Bowl or something other kind of consumer related, you normally have a fairly standard view of I'll get $3 or $4 return for every dollar invested, and that's super easy. And you obviously can get that in pharma and marketing as you grow and get product to market. We're sort of in that stage still where we're sort of in customer acquisition land in our kind of most grown up company.
Yeah.
And so you can obviously talk about, well, we'll probably talk to 100, different customers. And, if we can get, 20 interested in a pilot study, then that's a good outcome. that's, I suppose, where the experience and kind of, wherewithal comes from when you're a more startup company. Is, we have invested in going and attending some of these conferences, having a stand, investing in marketing material, having a big banner, having obviously goodies to give away and make people try and remember you and
Yeah.
engage. And we sort of did that with, I suppose, at risk. But the engagement from customers has been fantastic. We did surveys there to get customer feedback to really understand what they did, what they care about. When we go to market, what our marketing messages really should be. And we basically got that data for I think we gave them a $10 Starbucks voucher for
Okay.
for filling in a survey
Okay,
monkey.
yeah.
And if we'd done that through any kind of big consultancy, you'd be paying $300, $400, $500, $600 a survey probably
Yeah.
to get the same data. So that there we have very clear, tangible benefit of
Yeah.
attending and building relationships. But it was definitely taking a bit of chance as well.
So you've mentioned your approach is very much it sounds like it's very in person. You meet people, you get their feedback, blah, blah, blah. What role does digital / multi-channel / omni-channel play in the overall marketing mix?
Yeah, so I think I suppose we're probably two-channel
Okay. Okay.
digital kind of outreach. We have a website, which I suppose you have to sort of Google or be really looking probably quite closely to really find it for any of our companies. And then I suppose LinkedIn is the kind of classic business one. It's very difficult if you go back to being a founder and you don't really have much of a team. It's very difficult to kind of dedicate to have a very clear, I suppose, channel strategy.
Yeah.
But we have sort of developed that over time as we've grown the team into some of them. Some companies we do a lot on. Some companies we probably don't do as much as we should, and that's always the kind of toss up. But it's really good. There are lots of end customers who are posting on it and having that engagement with them, putting out your own kind of primary content. Definitely has increased our visibility.
Yeah.
I think people know who we are more. Going back to that kind of finance background, we've done some more kind of, I would say, more kind of financial press release type releases in terms of the good news flow we've had around either product, sort of regulatory clearances in the US or sort of go to market, and that has also been flagged up with some of the big kind of distribution partners. We've had we've had inbound mail off them interested in discussing, rather than us trying to knock on the door and saying, please, can you have a conversation with us? Which obviously starts that relationship off on a much better foot.
So just to drill into that a little bit more, are you saying some of the marketing that you do has a spillover effect to distributors, partners, and also investors, but that they're not necessarily the primary audience, or do you actually target them specifically? I know it's slightly different, but are they a target segment for you to go after? Yeah,
they are. I suppose when you're, when we think about very early stage customers, investors are number one. There is pretty much no other audience group we really care about in sort of totality. And then partners, they sort of kind of wiggle up the outside. They become very important later on. Most founders would like to have an exit or a way out in future, and that quite often is through a partner. So we sort of did that kind of press release strategy from an investor point of view and I suppose a partnership point of view. But once again, as we mentioned before, that sort of really comes down to when you're looking at marketing, you really have to think about who you are targeting, and then which channel you're targeting them through, because the messages change, the branding can change, and the mode of reaching them changes as well.
Yeah. So your experience, as I understand, is very much focused on medical devices, and the commercialization part of which is marketing. What do you think a medical device marketer could teach a pharma marketer about marketing?
Ooh.
If any.
That's a very good question. I think in medical devices there is a little bit more customer touch point.
Okay.
With a I suppose a more drug type one, It's, quite often going through the pharmacy. The doctor will sign off a script. I'm sure he has had a sales force go around. They will then, do their diagnosis, write a prescription, sort of go to the pharmacy, it gets dispensed, patient takes the drug. Through that chain, obviously you might go to your largest, clinics,
Yeah.
and talk to them and talk about the benefits. But a lot of people will just be driven by the marketing, by the data, by your, I suppose, probably more digital,
Right.
sort of content. Whereas in medical devices, some devices can be, I wouldn't say super complex to use, but there can obviously be some complexity. And
Yeah.
you quite often have sort of in-person, in-situ training to make sure that the device is being used correctly. Obviously, you try and design a device to be relatively fail-safe, but you normally have that kind of in-person touch points.
So the rep is there telling the healthcare professional, whoever, do it like this, don't do it like that. Live, almost with patients.
Exactly. So you've got the sales rep, and you quite often, we've got a very experienced marketer who's joined us in the last 9 months, who's worked in very, very large medical device companies. And he will also, be out there in the field with the sales reps, learning, talking to customers, understanding what they need. And then, as I'm sure probably everyone is aware, as much as sometimes meeting people in person can be a real, pain in today's world, you might have to travel, you've got different time zones. Actually, the kind of conversations you have around the reason why you're there can provide real insight. And I think medical devices, you have that kind of ability to actually be on site, have those sort of off-topic chats with customers, and that can then feed back into your marketing strategy.
Yeah.
And I don't think pharma probably get that opportunity anywhere near as much.
I think that's a really key difference. Because, look, I've not done much work in medical devices, but that connection between the sales rep, not only selling the product, but then holding the hand effectively of the healthcare professional who actually has to use it, builds that deep trust. Whereas the rep, most conditions they're just not involved. And even if you've got an MSL or medical affairs lead, they're just not quite there at the point where it's actually being used. And that, I think that makes it much harder actually to build that relationship and have that ongoing discussion. I'm sure you've got sales reps who've known their customers for decades, and they might have jumped around companies, but the relationships they have are actually the things that actually really make a difference. And I think that also that feedback loop, I should imagine, is really important, so that when the rep says, I was speaking to this person, they said this about the product, that can then help you adjust your strategy and your approach as a result.
Yeah, without a doubt. And it all feeds back into that kind of reiteration of devices potentially.
Yeah.
So some customers, would like a feature which does X, Y, Z, and you obviously can't always incorporate everything every customer wants into a device, but there might be ways where you can say, well, actually you can do that by doing this, and so customers then have a bit of a choice of how they sort of use a device when they get kind of used to having it in their facility.
Yeah. So I want to start to wrap us up now by doing our regular session of hate, rate, and debate about marketing. So this is where I'm going to put you on the spot. What do you hate, rate, and think we should be debating about marketing? So what's something you hate about marketing?
What do I hate about marketing? I think in the kind of pharma medical device context, marketing can always seem a bit of, I suppose, a kind of slog between departments and between people.
Yeah.
You have, obviously they are very highly regulated environments. You normally have regulatory and quality people who have particular views about what can be said, what can't be said. And that's not trying to say that, marketers want to say things, you're not allowed to or claim too much. But, the whole, I suppose, design of marketing is to push forward all of the positives of your device to the absolute maximum to obviously generate interest. And you have these processes which, are obviously for the benefit of patients and the wider users. But they can take obviously a long time. You sometimes feel like people can be battling head to head within an organization.
Yeah.
And that's obviously not necessarily a dynamic you have within other sectors quite as much. And that is, can be difficult to to deal with and manage.
Yeah, completely the same in pharma. But it takes me back to one of my first roles or as a brand manager, and you're sort of shepherding something around, and you're kind of going cap in hand to whoever to kind of get it signed off.
Exactly.
Almost begging that they'll do it. Yeah. So it sounds very similar in medical device. What about something you rate, something you think is really great?
I suppose I love the ability of kind of marketing to bring a brand, a company, a product sort of to life and sort of giving it that kind of real kind of professionalism. In the small cap world, sometimes your ideas are still on a whiteboard or in very early stage, and it's very difficult to when you're working with that, to feel like there is a tangible product at the end of it.
Yeah.
And also then to be able to portray that to the external world. I think marketing has, if you do it right, has the amazing ability of making the sort of intangible feel, real and actually like it might be something today rather than it's another 5 years down the road.
Yeah, and I think again, like we've talked about this before, but like the power of marketing is to create that connection between something which is ostensibly could be quite dull, quite boring, and you're like, actually no, I think that's really cool, or yeah, I can see where that fits, and you see that excitement in people, and like, yeah, I can definitely see a place for that. I think that's one of the joys I think of doing marketing.
Yeah, it's great. We've had some really good engagement from some key opinion leaders and customers, and sort of see their kind of face light up with you are going to solve a real problem, and and if you don't have good marketing, or I suppose any marketing, it's very difficult to get that message out there and to get that feedback, and that is definitely one of the real bright spots of doing that work.
Yeah. What's something you think we or marketers should be debating?
Probably on the lips of many people, and it's going to be AI.
Right. We've been going half an hour, and you finally said it. I'm amazed you went this long.
We've made it this far into the podcast without talking about AI. It obviously has a huge amount of uses. But with my hat on in terms of kind of small companies, founders, led people who haven't maybe done marketing and got that, I suppose, nuance or experience or whatever it may be. It can also be a very dangerous tool. I would say AI normally in the work I've done probably gets you 70 or 80% of the way there, which is obviously, if you can save huge amounts of time if you've got the experience of how to take that output and turn it into something really tangible, something really brilliant. It obviously saves time, saves resources, saves money. Those are obviously all things smaller companies or any company you want to achieve. And its power can be incredibly, can be incredibly helpful. But I think in the wrong hand, sometimes, that 70% you take almost as gospel. You don't try and tweak it too much. And, sometimes that works. But we talked a lot about trust kind of earlier on. And I think in pharma and medical devices, you sort of only really have one shot. If you lose people trust along the way, people are not going to believe your product, not going to believe your brand, your company, and ultimately that's just going to completely hamstring you as you go along. So the ability of AI is obviously incredibly powerful, but I think sometimes could be the tool which actually sinks you if you're not careful. I
think it's a great example, because I think it's almost like a little knowledge can be a dangerous thing. Like you can get super smart, you get 80%. For me, number one, that resets the bar. Like, because everybody can get to that. And if you don't really understand the right prompt or however you've created that output, you're like, it looks great, but to the seasoned eye, you're like, yeah, but that bit's not quite right. So I think it's so attractive for startups, because it seems great, but unless you've got that guardrails, unless you've got, going back to our conversation about experience, you could be taken off down a path that is completely undifferentiated, even though you feel it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I suppose in our journeys, when we have brought kind of external experience, sort of in to help us either with branding or marketing, it's a very good, I suppose, grounding to give you that kind of roundness to what you're trying to achieve. And then you can put the context of AI within a relatively good framework, and be sure that the messaging you're putting out is consistent with what you want to put out, and making sure you're targeting the right audiences, and then it can really improve your efficiency, which is obviously everything we want to everything we want to achieve.
Yeah, James, thank you so much for joining us today on Off Label. And thank you for watching today's episode. We hope you liked it. If you did, please give us a like, a share, or a repost. And if you would like to become a guest on Off Label, or you think there is a great guest we should be talking to, please don't hesitate to get in touch. James, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ed.